Hello again. I'm going to do another reaction video. And again, caveat at the beginning, I really like the animation on this. Really well done. Beautiful imagery, beautiful quality. And most of it, the content, I think is really good. I think Armchair Historian does a fantastic job. I'm a fan. But I'm a Normandy guy. I'm going to see some mistakes. I'm going to see some things I would improve in a video about Normandy. So this is a video about D-Day from the German perspective. And I'm going to sit here and watch it with you, but stop it every now and then and tell you what I think could be improved. If you are new to the channel, don't forget to click subscribe. Don't forget to like the videos you watch. Without further ado, let's start the video.
A trio of German officers stand on the parapet of the Atlantic Wall. At their head is Erwin Rommel.
Zweifelt keinen Moment daran, dass die Amerikaner und Engländer landen werden.
All really well done so far.
Welle von Männern und Stahl auf unsere Strände ergießen und wir müssen darauf vorbereitet sein. Wir haben Minen, wir haben Panzersperren, wir haben den gesamten Strand aufgeklärt. Wenn wir doch nur die Panzerreserven hätten. Ob in Calais oder hier in der Normandie, es steht dasselbe auf dem Spiel. Das Schicksal Deutschlands hängt vom Ausgang der ersten 24 Stunden der Landung ab. Für die Alliierten als auch für Deutschland wird es der längste Tag werden.
Hi, I'm Griffin Johnson, the Armchair Historian. The story of D-Day and its accompanying airborne and partisan operations is well known from the Allied perspective. But seldom is this critical juncture of the Second World War looked at through the eyes of those defending the Atlantic Wall. Seldom are the stories of individual German soldiers studied. In today's episode, we will revisit our most popular video, D-Day from the German perspective, and bring you recollections from the men who saw the French sky darken with paratroopers and the English Channel teem with battleships, and knew that the end of the Reich was at hand.
Now, so first comment here is generally about there's a reason we tell the story from the Allied point of view. A, the Allies won, and B, there's that much more material. Now, in this video, I don't think any of the German accounts being used are false, but there has been a very well-known book that came out a couple of years ago that was doing all the rounds, full of these accounts of Germans who were in Normandy and witnessed it all. It has since been identified that it's almost certainly 99.9% certain a fake. So there aren't many accounts. So when new ones turn up, there's an instant desire to kind of, oh, it's a new account by German. Be objective. Are they real? Have they been made up? I think the ones in this show are fine, but there are some out there that aren't correct. So there aren't many viewpoints. And even the ones we have, if you only have a handful of opinions, how objective can they be? How much information can you discern from it? If you've got 20 guys who served in the same company of an American airborne division and they all talk about the events, you've got a lot of range of understanding of how that event unfolded. If you've got one German in an entire division giving you a viewpoint, you see what I'm going with this? How accurate is that recollection? But I love the fact that he's presenting this from the German point of view. It should be done more, the enemy side of things. I try on my channel cover battles from both points of view. Really good. I like it. Let's continue.
The D-Day landings did not take the Germans completely by surprise. On the contrary, the highest echelons of German command were well aware that an invasion was imminent and of the least possible threat. The Führer was confident that the Atlantic Wall, stretching from the border of Spain to Norway, would not only repulse any Allied landing, but cause so many Commonwealth and American casualties that the Western Allies would lose their capacity to continue the war. Fritz Bayerlein.
I would argue that actually Hitler has probably realized the Atlantic Wall isn't likely to stop it. I mean, yes, we know he's a little bit by 1944, but he's not an idiot. He knows that production of the bunkers is behind schedule. He knows there's problems getting the materials to the coast to build these things. He had wanted the Atlantic Wall to be an impregnable fortress, but I think even Hitler, even with his paranoia, I think he's aware that by 1944 that it's not going to do the job. So Yeah, that's a bit of an odd one.
A senior aide to Erwin Rommel in Africa and later commander of the Panzerlehr Division at Normandy, held the debacle at Dieppe up as incontrovertible proof the Allies could not manage an amphibious assault. The series of successful Allied amphibious landings in Italy gave even Hitler pause, however, and he placed Rommel in charge of shoring up the defenses along the English Channel. Rommel's task was an enviable one. Concrete was at a premium, with the lion's share of Germany's supply going to the construction of hardened U-boat shelters per Hitler's direct orders. French laborers and Italian POWs were conscripted to improve the defenses.
So this is a little bit muddled, I think, because Rommel doesn't take command till comparatively close to the actual invasion, by which time the U-boat pens have been built already. So this is mixing its eras up a little bit. In 1942, when the Atlantic Wall is under construction, yes, concrete is going as a priority to the U-boat pens, Saint-Nazaire and Brest and Lorient and La Rochelle. But by the time Rommel is in charge, the pens have been done. So that's a bit misleading. Concrete is in short supply, but by 44, when Rommel's involved, 42 he's still in North Africa, folks. By 44, the concrete isn't going to U-boat pens.
Turrets from captured French tanks were made into makeshift emplacements named Tobruk's after a jury-rigged reinforced firing pit Italian soldiers had built with buried cement pipes in North Africa, and extensive minefields were laid. Perhaps Rommel's most ingenious inventions were the Rommelspargel, or Rommel's asparagus. Webs of metal wire strung along fields of short poles meant to shred gliders as they tried to land, alongside anti-ship mines placed into the beaches atop angled poles driven into the sand. But static defenses were only part of Rommel's strategy. Hitler and the High Command had become convinced the Allies would land at the easy-to-reach Pas-de-Calais. Operatives confirmed this loudly and often, falling for the Allied deception operation, Operation Fortitude.
Yeah, well, again, it needs some nuance here, because it is probable now that Hitler, although believing there is going to be a landing in the Pas-de-Calais, had not dismissed the idea of a diversionary landing occurring in Normandy. So when the landing was reported on the coast on June the 6th, Hitler wasn't completely surprised. What he was surprised about is several weeks later, when he realized that there wasn't another invasion, the real one coming to Pas-de-Calais. He realized the one in Normandy was the actual one, not just a diversionary one. So there's a little bit more to this story than the video is showing.
Rommel, for his part, began to shift his view toward an Allied landing at Normandy. The beaches were similar to the Italian shore, and the Allies would want to maximize their chances of success by striking on familiar ground. Regardless of where the Allies came, Rommel argued that the only way to beat them back was through defensive action on the beaches, meeting the Allies as they landed and denying them the opportunity to take even a centimeter of ground. Given the quality of the troops defending Normandy, this was far easier planned than executed. Normandy was the responsibility of the 7th Army, whose units in the area were, to put it mildly, of mixed quality. Promising recruits were siphoned off by SS, Fallschirmjäger, or Panzer recruiters, leaving a contingent of unfit or unremarkable men. Among the defenders of Normandy were the so-called ear and stomach battalions, composed of soldiers convalescing from combat wounds to their abdomens, or who were experiencing hearing loss.
This has since been questioned as being something of a myth, and there weren't the numbers of these guys that has been previously said, and the imagery there is misleading, because if they're not actually bleeding. I mean, these guys have had problems. That it's conveying that they're incapacitated. They've got bandages with blood coming at them. I guess in an animation, how do you show the fact that they've got hearing loss? But it's a weird image that, and again, we are now questioning the fact that how many of these ear and stomach battalions there actually were in Normandy. It's one of those tropes that has endured that probably doesn't bear examination at this point. I will mention the fact that Niels Henkermans, a friend of mine, has his new book coming out on the Germans in Normandy. which will address some of this kind of stuff.
And Osttruppen, foreign auxiliaries from conquered lands forced to fight for the Reich, including many Soviet POWs.
Yeah, again, by showing them not in uniform, it's implying they're not proper soldiers. And the Osttruppen within Normandy are a mixed. If the 7th Army is a mixed bag, the Osttruppen are a mixed bag as well. There are absolutely Osttruppen who don't want to be there, and they were volunteered to join the army, the German army, because the alternative was being shot. They've been picked up in the Eastern Front, Sam. It was like, we're going to kill you now, or you can join our army. I'll join your army, please. And you're doing that to not be shot. But there are other Osttroops who absolutely want to be there, who are motivated, who believe they're going to be given some kind of part within the Third Reich. They've been promised their independence from the Soviet Union. There's Chechens, things like that, weirdly topical of what's going on right now. There are Georgian troops who are possibly more motivated. So labeling all the foreign troops as being not good is not correct. There are some not good ones, and there are some highly motivated ones.
Naturally, most proved highly ineffective, with many deserting to join the French resistance or surrendering to the Allies at the first opportunity. The few capable...
The joining the French resistance thing is, again, a slightly misleading thing, because this video is about Normandy. There is a bit of a resistance activity in Normandy, but I don't think I've ever heard about any Osttroops joining the resistance in Normandy. It may well be happening elsewhere in Europe, and I'm sure it is happening elsewhere in Europe, but this is about Normandy. The narrator is not making it clear that this is a thing that, if it's happening, is happening elsewhere in France and Europe. It's not a thing in Normandy.
The first opportunity. The few capable soldiers either suffered from endemic fatalism, such as Captain Eberhard Wegemann of the 21st Panzer Division, who commented...
So this is misleading, because they've got SS runes on his tunic there. The 21st Panzer Division isn't SS. So somewhere along the line, they've not got the right information to the animators there, and there'll be more of those things I pick up on later on about the animation giving a false idea. Sometimes the narration is fine, but the imagery that accompanies it isn't, or indeed vice versa.
We were well aware that neither our men nor our tanks were good enough, or were almost fanatically prepared to meet their foes. This attitude was usually evinced by the younger SS troops. As June 5th crept into June 6th, the Kriegsmarine pulled patrols from the English Channel. German meteorologists had declared the weather unsuitable for an invasion through June 10th. There was, scientifically speaking, no chance of a landing. Rommel took these assurances as an opportunity to go on leave, returning to Germany to celebrate his wife's birthday and arrange an audience with Hitler to request additional panzers along the wall.
Nice animation there.
Friedrich Dollmann, commander of the 7th Army, ordered a command post drill for his officers on June 6th. The evening was shaping up to be a quiet affair, and the Germans began preparing for the next day's routine, until Allied bombs began falling. This itself was not unusual, as the Allies had launched near-continuous runs against the Germans for some time. But this raid was an overture to Operation Overlord. As sentries fought off sleep, gliders began to make silent landings. As officers crawled into bed, paratroopers began to descend to Earth. Bewildered German commanders found enemies literally raining down on their heads and desperately rang to their superiors or assembled cells of ad hoc resistance. Lieutenant General Josef Reicher, commander of the 711th Infantry Division, recalled a night of drinking in the officers' mess ending in combat. The inebriated officer, pistol in hand, stumbled out into the night to find British paratroopers raining down on the 711th's command post. Reichert and his men were able to fend off the assault, and the still drunk general desperately rang to his superiors to announce the beginning of the Allied invasion. In the American landing zones, Lieutenant General Wilhelm Fahly, commander of the 91st Luftlandedivision, Division, was ambushed and killed by the 82nd Airborne just behind his headquarters near Sault-Mare-Église.
Minor point, Sainte-Mère-Église. There's an S in the word Église. It means Holy Mother Church. That's what it means. You'd think you'd work out how to pronounce these names if you're doing a script like this. There's a couple other instances later on where things aren't said very well.
Germans proved less willing to give battle. Rainer Hartmetz, a soldier serving near Normandy, rushed to his command post to find his officers gripped by battle shock. 2 men were simply catatonic, while Reiner's company commander was sprawled drunkenly in a foxhole. Every time a runner brought news from the front line, the commander would idly threaten to execute anyone who returned to the scene of the action. As dawn began to light up the Normandy coast, the Germans were shocked to see an Allied armada steaming toward them. With no naval forces to challenge them, the Allied landing craft and their escorts took up their positions in the English Channel.
Well, it's not completely true, is it? We did a show on World War II TV ourselves. There are engagements, there are little things of German vessels out there in the Channel. Not much, but saying there's none is misleading. Watch the show we did on minesweeping, and you'll find out about some of these incidents that occur on the way over. There are definitely German vessels being sighted. So saying there's no Kriegsmarine there.
Channel. And that's when the shells began landing. The opening bombardment of Omaha Beach caught German shore batteries in the middle of preparing for gunnery practice, turning what should have been a morning of plinking in the Atlantic into a scramble for survival.
It's not specifying who's on these training maneuvers, because Omaha Beach is overlooked by several gun batteries, Long-Sur-Mer, Pointe du Hoc. There's the Widerstands that's behind Omaha Beach. The implication is that all of these troops are involved in some kind of training exercise thing. No, it's not the case. There are training things going on, but there's an implication that it's a universal thing, which it isn't.
Weathering this bombardment was the 716th Static Infantry Division, a unit of notoriously low quality. Composed of decrepit or boyish conscripts and ill-motivated Osttruppen, the division was denied the usual
sweeping statements
of artillery and heavy vehicles their peers in the army enjoyed.
And they are in the army.
A hodgepodge of German armaments and foreign heavy weapons. But the 716th was not alone at Omaha, as other areas were defended by the much more powerful 352nd Infantry Division. As battle was joined on the beach and American servicemen scrambled for cover, machine gunner Heinrich Zavelo of the 352nd could see the water spouts where my machine gun bursts were hitting. And when the little fountains got close to the GIs, they threw themselves down. They lay in the shallow water. Many tried to get to the most forward beach obstacles to find some cover behind them. I fired some more at the many dark foams in the water. Zavelo's senior, one Lieutenant Frerking, pitied the Americans as poor swine. Well,
I'm just going to interrupt it there. It'll carry on. A couple of things. One is Zavelo was not in a huge great bunker like that. He was in a shell scrape. He was in an open position in the earth. So this is representing how he was set up incorrectly. The next thing is about the whole reliability of Zavelo's account. I did meet Zavelo many years ago. I did meet Franz Gockel many years ago. Zavelo, given this title of the Butcher of Omaha Beach, which the presenter of this was there, killed between 1,000 and 2,000 guys on D-Day. It's that's we know this is nonsense now. We know he's not repeating these claims made, but there's some errors in this that I think need to be addressed, and it gets talked about a lot. He fired 9,000 rounds over 10 hours behind his gun. Well, 9,000 rounds over 10 hours is less than 1,000 an hour, which is nothing. Anyway, I'm going down a rabbit hole, but Heinz Zavelo's account can be taken with a pinch of salt now about how accurate it is, which brings me back to my point earlier about the lack of German accounts we have. Zavelo's is the one everyone uses. If for anyone out there considering making a program about D-Day, Franz Gockel's account, I think, is much more consistent, much more reliable, not as exciting, but that's why the Zavelo one gets used, because it has these nice little juicy quotes in it that seem to highlight these things very well. But again, the bunker's all wrong. We will progress.
Even as he called more artillery strikes onto the floundering infantry. All over the beach, Zavelo could see wounded, moving around on the bloody, watery slime, mostly creeping, trying to get to the upper beach and find some cover behind the shingle embankment. One by one, they would occasionally run in a crouch. As the day went on, men like Zavalo and their heavy weaponry would make Omaha the deadliest landing on D-Day.
Well, you know my feelings about this, folks. The deadliest landing on D-Day. I hate labels that say something is best, worst, biggest. Depends how you quantify it. I've been banging this drum for a long time and I will continue to bang it. Juno Beach has equal number of fatalities if we're talking about a percentage, and how you define deadliest. I don't like it. I just hate this idea that Omaha is being presented as something very different to the other four beaches. It's a language thing. It annoys me. It was deadly, but it wasn't markedly more deadly, and carry on. Oh, and by the way, it's interesting we're going straight into Sword Beach, because I'll stop this in a minute and make a real point about the way there's a subliminal suggestion. In fact, it's not subliminal, it's an in-your-face suggestion, is that Omaha, deadly, deadly danger, German machine gunner in big concrete bunker with ceiling. Brrr. And then when we go to Sword Beach, it's telling you, oh, it doesn't seem so bad here. Let's continue, and I will stop it when we get to the relevant bit.
The 716th Division at Sword Beach was a sorry affair. The overstretched Germans were severely lacking in air support or completed fortifications, and had utterly failed.
Well, that's wrong for a start. Sword Beach has more bunkers than any of the other four beaches, and finished bunkers. There are some under construction, but it's using language in a way that you've just done the Americans. They're the tough bit. Oh, Sword, where the British landed, that wasn't so bad at all. I hope it's got no air cover. Well, the Germans they'd have the same air cover on all five beaches. As someone whose great uncle came ashore on Sword Beach, I'm often offended by the idea immediately that, oh, the Brits haven't got anything like as bad. Sword Beach, the bunkers aren't finished. The Germans are really hopeless there. Omaha's the place where it's all deadly, folks. Again, I like the video. I like this historian generally, but he's reinforcing an idea that he wants you, the viewer, to believe that Omaha is way, way worse, and Sword is always just kind of, it's just walk in the park.
To coordinate with coastal artillery in their sector. The area teemed with vacation homes and coastal settlements.
See how it's showing houses?
Placements in the sand dunes and a handful of beach obstacles.
Look at that! Look, they've got the Germans in a sand pit there. So when they're showing Omaha, no, they're in a concrete bunker. Wrong. Defenses on Sword Beach are really in depth. You've got the gun batteries inland of Daimler, Morris, Hillman. You can be overlooked from Merville Battery over to the east, which it doesn't mention at all. And believe me, the bunkers are there. They've got 88s and 75s and 50mm and stuff. And yes, there are houses there. But this image you're seeing on screen now is conveying to people who don't know anything a very unrealistic idea of Sword Beach. Rewind yourself, folks, and go back to when it showed the Sevelo story with the German in the machine and firing his machine gun there at the Americans on the beach, and look at what that image tells you, and look at what this image is telling you. It's setting it up in a very, very different and unfair way.
Was largely undeveloped. The individual soldiers were also of low quality, with Lieutenant Karl Haida bemoaning the condition of his division's officers. Many had been severely wounded previously. Some became unpleasant or socially inept due to their early harsh war experiences. I will not deny that some did get drunk at times. Lieutenant Schaff of the 716th noted that the rank and file were overworked and ill-motivated, too busy putting up wire and planting Rommel's asparagus to have much time for training. Indeed, the mix of Germans and Osttruppen defending Sword Beach routinely evinced a lack of care.
There we are again. See the guns there in an open emplacement. There are some in open emplacements. There are others also covered. It's suggesting everything's bad. It's taking the worst of the German defenders on Sword Beach to represent that they're all hopeless there. And then it talks about the machine gun Omaha Beach with his constantly firing machine gun as being a representation of what's happening there. And it's just not fair. It's telling this story loaded in a particular manner.
as artilleryman Hans Glaub describes his fellow gunners failing to keep their pieces clean. Sword would prove to be a relatively smooth landing, with the Germans yielding the beach to British forces with minimum casualties.
Yielding the beach to British forces? You mean the British forces overwhelmingly dominated the landing there, killed lots of Germans, had men killed on the beach, and through firepower and the use of Sherman tanks and the commandos on the flanks and the persistence of the South Lancs and the East Yorks overcame the German defense on Omaha Beach? Yes, I'm a bit agitated.
Their attitude would change when they met the more professional soldiers of the 21st Panzer Division, launching a two-pronged counterattack to the east and west of Sword. However, Major Hans von Luch, commander of the Eastern Thrust, wrote in his memoir Panzer Commander of attempting to lead the 2nd Battalion of the 21st against dug-in British paratroopers, only to be stymied by Allied air.
Now here it goes the other way now. It's just said that defenders aren't very good and that the 21st Panzer are strong, but it's showing you Panzer IV there, and the 21st Panzer is mostly Marders on D-Day going towards it. There's a couple of Panzer IVs and stuff like that, but it's loading things up in a particular way. And by the way, Hans von Luch, who I used to write to his wife after Hans von Luch passed away, his book has some outright exaggerations of events when we get to Operation Goodwood and the 88s on the hill there. So there's another memoir there by a participant that can be brought into question for its accuracy. And I say that as someone who thought Hans von Luch was a pretty cool guy to kind of, read about and understand, but definitely some bias in his accounts there, definitely some things we can take with a pinch of salt, and there's some visual messages being sent here that I wouldn't entirely agree with.
Aircraft and naval fire.
Just on that thing there about Typhoons and tanks, we've talked about it on the channel before. There aren't that many cases really of Typhoons knocking out tanks with that kind of shot. When Typhoons come in with rockets, what they're mostly after is the soft skins, the fuel bowsers, the transports, the repair trucks that go along behind. A lot of the German armor knocked out in Normandy was knocked out by artillery. It was knocked out by that force. Of course, there's nothing like those paintings where there's Typhoons flying in over the Falaise Gap and what have you and firing rockets, and they were terrifying. And yes, German soldiers are terrified of Typhoons and Thunderbolts, the Yabos, the dive bombers, and the fear of being caught in the open by those was probably greater than the actual threat. They were an important arm, Typhoons, and I'm not negating their importance in the Normandy campaign, but that stereotypical idea of a tank being blown up by a rocket coming in like that doesn't really convey how they were used in the Normandy campaign. Watch some of our shows with our guest Matt Bone to understand more about Typhoons.
The German defense at Utah Beach was compromised by the airborne operations.
Already it's wrong with the terrain. Utah Beach is completely flat with floods behind it, and this should have been animated to represent what Utah Beach actually looks like.
Phone lines had crippled their ability to exchange
No cliffs like
information, while the spread-out landing zones made mounting a large-scale defense difficult. Utah and its environs were defended primarily by the 709th Infantry Division, made up of older Germans, and the ever-ubiquitous Osttruppen, armed with a bizarre mix of weapons. French, German, Polish, even Russian armaments filled their stores, but blessed with competent leadership at least. Lieutenant General Karl Wilhelm Graf von Schlieben, overall commander of the 709th, would order an actual organized counterattack in the face of the airborne assault, arranging for the 100th Panzer Battalion to drive forward to meet the 82nd Airborne at Saint-Mère-Iglay, and at their critical bridgehead over the Mérode.
Pronunciation in Saint-Mère-Iglay and the Merderet, and you've mentioned the Merderet River there, the bridgehead, but you're not showing the bridge. This action is all about a bridge. The tanks are right. They were French tanks there, but you're missing a trick to not show that this was the vital bridge over the floodplains at the Merderet River, west of Saint-Mère-Iglay at Lafayette, that I've talked about on my channel. And it's a wasted opportunity of actually showing what the terrain was all about here. I'm being critical, but hey.
The 100th would be driven back by the 82nd in spectacular fashion as the obsolete French tanks they deployed against the Americans were annihilated with bazookas and gammon grenades. But the 82nd were not the only paratroopers in the area. the 6th Paratroop Regiment, under the command of Major von der Heide, pushed out of Carentan to reinforce...
Misleading, isn't it? The 6th Fallschirmjäger absolutely were there, but it's showing them jumping. It's showing them jumping in. That's a German paratroop coming down by chute. They didn't jump in. They were here as ground troops. They hadn't been jumping for years. Most of the Luftwaffe and Fallschirmjäger troops in Normandy came there via truck or train. It's a visually weird message it's sending there about the Fallschirmjäger and von der Heide. Sorry, but it is.
Force their ground-based colleagues. As they came upon the Americans' landing zones, the Germans were astonished at the number of parachutes left behind. Yards and yards of silk littered the fields of France. The Fallschirmjäger would push onto the commune Saint-Côme-du-Mont, where Heide climbed the church steeple and saw the endless armada in the channel.
Well, yes, that's true. And well done, by the way, for saying Saint-Côme-du-Mont, not saying Saint-Marie-du-Mont, because a lot of historians believe he was at the church at Saint-Marie-du-Mont, but he was actually at the church at Saint-Côme-du-Mont. So you get a woody round of applause for getting the right church there. But from the Saint-Côme-du-Mont church tower, the beach is like 7 or 8 miles away. He's looking down as if it's at his feet. Okay, it's visual, it's trying to create an idea, but he's straining his eyesight at something 8 miles away where he's not really able to see the fleet. What he can see is kind of the smokestacks. He can sort of see the effects of the bombardments and things like that. And here, I guess he probably can hear things, but he can't actually see the fleet in the way it's shown in this video. Again, perhaps I'm being a bit picky.
Things were not much better for the Germans on the beach proper. Lieutenant Arthur Janke commanded Fort W5, a network of bunkers and pillboxes built into the dunes over the beaches, which was all but destroyed by the morning bombings. Janke recalled how the raids obliterated his position. Avalanches of sand and concrete buried his men alive, forcing them to be dug out even as the assault on the beaches.
Some of his men.
Spotting the American landing craft, Janke ordered what men he could rally to dig in, and ordered a dispatch rider to make for the nearest artillery battery to shell the beach.
They didn't need to dig in like that. They have prepared defenses. There's Widerstandsnest 5. It's not a fort. I mean, he could explain that he's using fort as a translation, not a very good translation of Widerstandsnest, which means resistance nest. But Widerstandsnest 5 at Utah Beach has bunkers and trenches and so and so. What he means by dig in is he means kind of take cover. But the image is showing them that guy with a spade there actually digging a hole. That's not what's happening on Utah Beach with the German troops. They are manning those that haven't been killed by the bombing, those that haven't been buried underground. I think that is maybe 2 guys. They are hunkering down in their already prepared positions. They're not actually digging fresh foxholes, come trenches.
Janke's rider would be intercepted by American paratroopers. There was little Janke and his men could do as the landings began in earnest. With men and floating tanks fighting their way through the surf and straight toward the ruins of W5.
Ruins, strong word.
Janke to the ground, and as his eyes fought to focus and the ringing in his ears subsided, he looked up through his skewed spectacles to see an American infantryman standing over him. As combat intensified on Normandy and reports of paratroopers and an Allied fleet flooded high command, the General Staff thought to themselves, this is all an elaborate ruse. The General Staff passed this thought around as Hitler slept in. As more and more Allied troops and heavy equipment began making their way onto the beaches, Hitler finally rolled out of bed to be met with word of the invasion of France. The Führer could not have been happier. Hitler declared again that the Atlantic Wall would throw the Allies back, and he eagerly anticipated following up the inevitable failure of the Normandy landings by raining V-1 bombs on London. The Western armies would be ground into the sands of France, and the seat of his hated British enemies would be blown to smithereens by superior German weaponry. But as the day dragged on, and the Allies began to gain ground, the frontline commanders flooded High Command with requests for support, requests to do something to prevent their positions from being overrun. The beacons of Normandy were lit, but High Command would not answer the call for aid. Hitler, the only man on Earth who could release the panzers, would continue to insist that the Allies could and should be thrown back on the shore.
Now, you see that there's quite a lot to unpack with this. People have come to think that this releasing of the panzers is something that it isn't. So there's two kind of sets of panzers in France or in Northwest Europe that we're talking about here. So there's the other units that are nowhere near the beaches. There's the ones that are miles and miles away that, yes, he could release, but they're never going to get there on the day, of course, because they have to move at night because of the Allied bombing and blah, blah, blah. And all of those units, by the way, do end up pretty much getting to Normandy, which is why the Battle of Normandy descends into a 76-day campaign all around Caen, the 9th SS and the 10th SS and Panzer and Das Reich and all these other units turn up there and turn it into a massive, great area of combat, particularly around Caen through June and July. But by the talking about the release of the panzers, it's not talking about the units that are already nearby in Normandy that could be doing something different. We've already mentioned 21st Panzer, who are close enough to do something. There's the 12th SS Hitlerjugend division that's close enough to do something. There's also 17th SS that are not too far away that could be moving that way there. So it's this idea there's this single body of reinforcements that is a bit misleading by this. There are other reinforcements and things nearby that it's oversimplifying things, is the point I'm making. Just interesting why it's chosen to do the beaches in the way it has, because they kind of chronologically go west to east, although technically Juno comes a little bit after Sword. But why did it go Omaha, then it went to Sword, then it went back to Utah, and now it's doing Gold? Why not do them in chronologically order they unfolded? And I think it's something to do with the storytelling. As I said earlier, this idea of Omaha being all scary and then cutting to Sword, well, it was just that the Germans yielded the beach. It's telling you the story a way it wants you to understand the story.
This thinking had managed to seep into some of the defenders on Gold Beach. Friedrich Wurster helped crew a battery of 4 captured Czech cannons at Marie-Fontaine near the beach. Wurster firmly agreed with his Führer that the Atlantic Wall was impenetrable, an attitude he kept right up until the British overran his commander's spotting position near the shore. In the face of Allied superiority in men and materiel, Wurster and his fellows quietly surrendered. Further behind the lines, the Germans were hard at work trying to corral the French civilian population. Propaganda vans drove through Caen, ordering the population to remain indoors while the German authorities began to arrange for the evacuation of key parts of the city. At von Rundstedt's headquarters outside of Paris, telephones rang continuously, and teletypes spewed seemingly infinite messages. Combat at Gold Beach began in earnest when the first landing craft dropped their ramps. The moment the metal hit the surf, German machine guns and artillery opened up on the British troops, who fought hard to clear the beach and sweep the fortified coastal houses the Germans had worked into their defenses. Indeed, the Germans put up a fierce fight at Gold, with elements of the 352nd Infantry raining fire on the British from a cliff top over the beach at Amel.
It's Anel, not Amel. And the visual representation of this is not very accurate. It's 2021 this was made. You know, we've got Google Earth now. We've got loads of digital imagery. You can find out what the terrain of Gold Beach looks like. Tell the animators to get it right. We're talking about the buildings right behind the beach, again, a bit like it showed with Sword. This is not quite how Gold Beach looked. And
including devastating volleys from a Flak 88. The British were only able to unseat the Germans at Amel with tank support, including a mortar-armed member of Hobart's Funnies.
I think it's getting its stories a bit muddled up there. The big bunker at Anel, not Amel, was knocked out by a Sexton, which is a self-propelled gun of the Essex Yeomanry at close range that knocked the casemate out. You can stand there and visit it now and see where it is. There were Funnies there, but I think the action it's talking about of the particular bunker that's knocked out, it's an SPG that does it, self-propelled gun, not a Funny with a mortar. Although there are 79th Division Funnies on the beach there. I think, I'll give the benefit of the doubt, maybe he doesn't mean that, but I think he means that one by the Essex Yeomanry.
Elements of the 12th SS Division spotted the invasion fleet anchored off of Juno Beach in the early morning hours. Lieutenant Peter Hansman of the 12th recalled being awoken.
So this is very misleading. And the reason it's misleading is 12th SS were not near Juno Beach. The 12th SS were there later, very late on June the 6th. They were over kind of the other side of Normandy and Lisieux. If this Peter Hansman guy, who I have read about, was anywhere near the beach to see the coast, and I'm not sure he was, he's an exception to where the division. This is implying the 12th SS Division are just behind the beach, able to see the landing take place, which they're not. They're inland. They're the one of the units that can be moving. And as we should have said, they don't get released to move to the coast till middle of the afternoon. So I've got all sorts of problems with this implication that 12th SS are behind the beach watching it unfold. So sorry, this is dodgy.
By his NCO in charge, shaking my shoulders. Herr Leutnant, the invasion has started. Hansman rushed to a vantage point near Gold Beach. Looking through my binoculars, I recognized the individual outlines of ships. At irregular intervals, flashes of ships' artillery were coming from various spots. Fast boats with high, white, foamy bow waves were spitting out brown clumps of men on the beach. The lieutenant counted over 400 ships in the channel from his front row seat to the end of the Third Reich. I wanted to shout at all the generals right up to Adolf Hitler, "Over here, quickly, before it's too late. Whoever can still fight, come here. The fastest, most powerful divisions, send them here. The Luftwaffe, where is it? The Kriegsmarine, where is it? It must get here." Grenadier Hans Weiner, who defended a position on Juno dubbed WN31, recalled watching the first Tommies jumping into the sea, which was quite shallow. The bullets hit them and their boats to good effect, and I was a little surprised to see them falling. I don't know why. Weiner's position was eventually torn apart by the tanks coming ashore with the Canadians, which managed to drive inland under the barrel of 88mm cannons poised to shred them as they emerged from the surf. 88mm gunner Heinrich Zebel complained of not being able to see many tanks due to the smoke and chaos, though his gun claimed at least 2 Allied tanks before their Blockhaus 2 was blown apart.
See, it's showing the classic anti-aircraft, anti-tank 88 when it means an 88 43, Pack 43 inside a casemate, so on the beach. So the visuals don't match up with the story that's being told here. Sorry.
House 2 was blown apart. The Germans provided a much tougher obstacle for their foes at the Tailleville Chateau, roughly 1 mile or 1.5 kilometers inland. Tailleville was supposed to be the starting point for a second line of defensive works laid out by Rommel before the Allied landings came. It was a well-built strongpoint, with a full communication and command complex and underground tunnels connecting it to Tobruk turrets armed with machine guns, cannons, and mortars.
Okay, yeah, so they look nothing like that. I was literally at Tailleville yesterday, and there are Tobruks there, but not like this, not with tank. That's like a King Tiger turret or something on that. It's not right. There are photos of Tailleville Chateau. You can get the animation right. Why do nonsensical versions when you can do the actual version? It's just lazy.
The defenders managed to hold the Allies back until nearly 6 p.m. that day, with their final message before the position was taken reading, "Hand-to-hand fighting inside the command post, hemmed into a closely confined area, but still holding out. Heil Hitler." Not long after the fall of Tailleville, the Canadians began making their way toward the Luftwaffe airfield at Copycat, one of their key objectives. The commandant of the airfield ordered an evacuation, inciting panic in his ground crews. The Germans made a hurried attempt to destroy the aircraft before they evacuated, but their haste proved fatal. Attempts to raise the airfield left most of the taxiing area.
Was very misleading. And by the way, I've noticed all the German riflemen are firing left-handed. I don't know that it matters. The Canadians are indeed pushing for Carpiquet Airport and on June the 6th, and they famously get within about 1.5 miles of it on June the 7th, when the Canadian 9th Brigade is pushed inland and meets the 12th SS, which now have arrived, and get halted in the village of Oti, just inland from Buron. But this graphic, see it there, it's got a Messerschmitt in the background there, and there's Canadian infantry in front of it there. This didn't happen. There's no battle like that for Carpiquet on June the 6th. There is a battle for Carpiquet a month or so later, Operation Windsor, when they're fighting for the airfield. But the narration is all right. It's pushing for Carpiquet Airport, but the implication that there are German and Canadian troops shooting at each other for the airfield, on the airfield, with the aircraft sitting around them is just completely nonsensical. I'm sorry, but it is.
Of the runway untouched. The takeoff runway was damaged, but not sufficiently to render it unusable, and the vast majority of the field's fuel stores were salvageable. In this one case, haste ended up lessening waste. From the invasion of Poland all the way up until D-Day, the story of the Second World War is told from the perspective of the ascendant Nazi Germany, the Bronze Eagle casting a wide shadow over the history of the early war. But from the very moment the first Allied boot makes landfall in Normandy, the narrative changes, and the rest of the war is studied almost exclusively from the Allied perspective. We hope you have enjoyed hearing these personal recollections from German soldiers on Normandy, and agree with us that it is important to know the thoughts of even those on the wrong side of history, for it is only by seeing both sides of a conflict that one can form a complete picture.
Okay, super, great. I agree with you completely there, except you've used these accounts in a skewed way. The story you're telling is skewed to kind of make some areas look worse and tougher than other areas, and you're selecting accounts there. The Peter Hansman account, I'm going to go back to that because, yeah, he was part of a scouting group of the 12th SS that probably were in the Bayeux, Courseulles area and maybe saw the bit landings. And I'm not going to say his account is or isn't correct, but this suggestion that 12th SS are just behind the beach, that we are drawing from that, is incorrect. And it comes back to my original point about the fact that we are teaching this history from the Allied point of view because we have more accounts, not because we don't want to teach it from the German side, but we have so few accounts on the German side, they need to be treated with caution, with is this authentic? Is this accurate? So we're not going to be able to change the way history is told from this point of view about this period, because for every German account, we have 19, 29, 39 Allied accounts. So therefore, because we have so few German accounts, we have to be even more critical of them, even more arms folded, look at them and say, is this saying the story the way it actually unfolded? Is this accurate? Is this the representative view of all the Germans in this area? Or is it one guy? Is it his feeling? Why does his account survive? What was he trying to say? Especially when you get to the commanding officers, the likes of Dolman and people like that, why are they writing it the way they're writing? Are they what those talking about the Hitler's high command? Why are they saying it? Are they trying to get themselves off the hook in war crimes trials? Are they trying to blame everything on Hitler when it's not there? There's lots of baggage to unpack with this. So basically, I have a few problems with the way it's representing things here, and yet I do like the channel. I do think he's a good historian. I do think he is getting things across. It comes down to the fact that none of us know everything. And this channel is covering a broad spectrum of history, multiple periods, things like that. And therefore, he can't be a specialist on everything. And it comes back to what I said at the end of the reaction video to the other D-Day film is, why don't you run your script by people who might know these things? Are the sources you're using accurate enough? And there's some good books in the sources of the original video that he used for this. But there maybe could be some other sources. Some of them need to be considered as whether or not they're accurate. Anyway, there you are. I hope you enjoyed it. And that's my critique of that video. So thank you very much for watching. Cheers.